Aspettiamo che... Ecco qua. Stavo aspettando la telecamera. Salve gente, ho deciso di fare questo video con la telecamera anche per vedere un po' la nuova reazione in live, per così dire, face to face, perché sono usciti, siamo di nuovo qui con TotalWar, perdonatemi, Pharaoh, e tra l'altro, piccola parentesi, l'altra volta avevo detto non è la classica trama dell'impero egiziano che si deve evolvere, ma bensì siamo in una buona porzione, come hanno detto gli sviluppatori, dell'era del bronzo, però nella decadenza dei grandi imperi, Ittiti, egiziani, eccetera, eccetera. Quindi loro, ovviamente, questi imperi dovranno cercare di salvaguardarsi scontrandosi con le altre civiltà antiche. Quindi siamo tornati di nuovo qui su TotalWar Pharaoh. Accidenti, perdonatemi, non ho fatto partire il timer, qualche secondo in più, non importa. E perché ci sono delle novità? Ci sono delle novità, tra l'altro io vi dico, stavo molto tranquillamente leggendo, adesso vedrete un po' di cavoli miei, la mia cronologia di Warhammer 40.000 su un sito a parte, proprio perché in questi giorni mi sono veramente fissato tantissimo con il fantasy, con tutto quello che ne ha a che fare di Warhammer, sia il fantasy sia la versione di Age of Sigmar, quindi, ma anche il 40.000, e di questo ve ne voglio parlare nel prossimo video, del perché ho deciso, in un certo senso, ovviamente sempre tempo permettendo, quando posso, sia di portarvi gli storici, ma di rompere anche le regole del canale, e di conseguenza di quando avevo detto che portavo solo storici, rompere queste regole e portare anche RTS, ma perché no anche degli strategici Total War per quanto riguarda per appunto il mondo di Warhammer Fantasy e Warhammer 40.000. Altri fantasy poi vedremo in futuro, però nel frattempo porto questo perché mi ci sono parecchio accanito in questi ultimi anni e ho deciso di rompere, perdonatemi il ruttino, ho deciso di rompere le regole del canale, romperle nel senso cercare di portare quindi anche titoli strategici però del fantasy. Ma come detto ne parliamo in un altro video. Cosa molto importante, adesso siamo ritornati qui sulla nostra pagina di TotalWar Pharaoh, della pagina diretta di Total War. Ora, dall'altra volta questa pagina non ha cambiato minimamente nulla, cioè nel senso... tutte quante le informazioni sia di prevendita che le altre informazioni generali per capire in che periodo ci trovavamo, per capire contro che fazioni dovevamo giocare, eccetera eccetera. Tra l'altro anche i DLC, scusatemi si tiro su ma non ho un fazzoletto, sono già state viste l'altra volta in quello che avevo detto l'altra volta. È uscito ovviamente, sono uscite le nuove FAQ per quanto riguarda le domande e le risposte dei nuovi preordini, sono stati un po' ampliati bene o male dagli screenshot che avevamo visto l'altra volta su Steam, sulla pagina di Steam di Total War Pharaoh, e questa pagina bene o male non è cambiato praticamente nulla. Quello che è cambiato invece è che è uscito un video di 45 minuti, quindi noi cercheremo di portarlo il più avanti possibile. Io l'ho già portato avanti di 2 minuti perché nei primi 2 minuti introducono un pochino il video e fanno rivedere nuovamente il trailer. Noi il trailer l'abbiamo già visto senza che ve lo faccia vedere io, è semplicemente uno scarabeo che porta questa pallina di cacca da una parte all'altra finché non arriva in mezzo al campo di battaglia tra egiziani e probabilmente Ittiti o Cananei, insomma queste due fazioni. E come detto, bando alle ciance perché voglio subito far partire il video per guardarlo insieme, per capire di che cosa parlano gli sviluppatori e di conseguenza quali saranno le novità, come le hanno sviluppate, su che basi storici si sono basati e tutto il resto. Ovviamente tutto questo in diretta, quindi faccio subito partire il video con i sottotitoli.
Hi everybody, welcome to your first
e io ovviamente cercherò di commentarlo.
look at TotalWar Pharaoh. I'm happy to be joined by Maya and Todor, who have come over from the dev team to come say hello, and we're going to get right into it by asking...
Ok, perdonatemi che provo a migliorare un po'
What is TotalWar Pharaoh?
la qualità.
TotalWar Pharaoh, simply put, is the next big historical Total War. It's focused on Egypt, and it aims to encompass all of the Bronze Age collapse era, bringing everything relevant of this, exciting time to the, TotalWar players and to the series.
What can players expect from this new historical title?
Well, the players can expect to be immersed into the Bronze Age collapse, the very last portion of the Bronze Age. And this means that they will have to go through a struggle to gain power in order to survive the apocalypse that descends upon the world. They will also be able to play as an Egyptian faction or a faction belonging to one of the other Bronze Age cultures. From that time period.
Dell'era del bronzo.
And who are these different cultures? Can you name them all?
I imagine that at least the playable ones, along with the Egyptians, we are portraying the city-states of Canaan and the Hittite Empire that is about to collapse and will likely collapse before the Egyptians.
We've had 23 years of historical titles. What's
23
different about
anni,
Pharaoh
signori.
from all the ones we've seen in the past?
Anni.
We really have had, a long series, but we haven't had a series focused on Egypt up until now. So this is the first time.
Fermo un secondo. Ok, perché mi lagga la telecamera, perdonatemi. Ok. Non so perché mi lagga la telecamera, fermo un secondo, molto velocemente voglio dire questa cosa qui. Quello di cui stavamo parlando l'altra volta, nell'altro video, e di cui non parlerò più perché poi alla fine è questo il concetto, il nucleo, e sicuramente questo si dovrà vedere quando verrà poi sviluppato un nuovo TotalWar. È proprio questo, la TotalWar, ok, la sezione storica, cioè la sezione Sophia che sviluppa i titoli storici, ha concentrato questo TotalWar perché era un'età del bronzo egiziana, quindi l'antico Egitto, che non aveva mai toccato, proprio per questo motivo. È un'era così antica, addirittura primitiva a Troy, che, a cui non possono svilupparne altre ere primitive, proprio per l'appunto perché sì, magari ci sarebbe stato l'impero babilonese, o che magari aggiungeranno come DLC o free DLC a questo nuovo titolo, o quanti altri, perché più o meno le date combaciavano, ma prima di questo si andava veramente alle civiltà mesopotamiche, e le civiltà mesopotamiche erano civiltà basate sull'era della ceramica, o bene o male ancora, non dico della pietra, ma poco dopo. Ma purtroppo sono ere che sono incompatibili con le meccaniche di gioco TotalWar, a parere mio, ma penso anche a parere di molti altri, proprio per le meccaniche di battaglia, le meccaniche di assedio, le meccaniche di campagna, e forse anche le meccaniche di battaglie navali, sempre se ci saranno, di imboscata, tattiche e quanto altro. È proprio questo che voglio dire, è proprio questo che dico. Il prossimo TotalWar, è vero, è presto pensarci, ma il prossimo TotalWar molto probabilmente risalirà molto più vicino all'800, ovviamente dopo Cristo. E niente, questo è quanto, ci tenevo a chiarirla questa cosa, andiamo avanti.
TotalWar is exploring Bronze Age Egypt, one of the greatest civilizations ever, and
è anche una delle prime,
of course,
è anche una delle prime civilizzazioni, proprio per questo motivo qua.
Point of view, the rest of the Bronze Age collapse as well. What puts Pharaoh apart is that it kind of reveals this new age, and also puts the player freedom at the center. So we get to have like a very the freest form of expression in your campaign as much as you can. And
actually, the very time period that we have chosen, like the end of the 13th century BC, actually helped us because there is relatively little information about some of our characters, so we had to extrapolate a lot to really flesh them out. But at the same time, we had to, because we're aiming to have these strong characters with recognizable presence in the game.
You touched on it, but why does this era make for an interesting Total War setting?
Sentiamo.
Well, the New Kingdom period, which is what we're covering in the game, and so a portion of the New Kingdom period, it's when Egypt grew to be an empire and they projected their influence far from the banks of the Nile. And it's perfect for a Total War setting, and actually the military technology also fits the purpose of Total War because they had chariots in the older kingdoms that they did not have them. In this particular portion, we're showing a very peculiar kind of Egypt, an Egypt that gets gradually torn by civil wars and internal strife. And this is an era ripe for a total war. Apart from that, the entire world slowly sinks into a crisis, which then turns into the collapse of the Bronze Age, because all of the civilizations are gradually falling apart in the region. There are a lot of disasters happening, and there are also a sort of external danger that also looms above the region.
It's really dramatic time when you have invasions, you have internal turmoil and strife, and that's what make a good setting for total war.
So this is after the pyramids. It's obviously after the Valley of the Kings. Are these the final days of Egypt?
Kind of. They could be.
Attenzione.
Historically, they were almost saved by the bell. Just.
Bisogna sempre contare comunque che sì, esatto, le piramidi erano state fatte prima, però alla fine l'epoca è quella, cioè nel senso non penso che vanno pre quel periodo lì, di conseguenza è anche automatico pensare, vabbè, che sì, che non si va prima di quel periodo, cioè è un parere mio, ma non puoi basarti su un total war fatto dell'era della ceramica o della pietra, sarebbe veramente impossibile, quello che sto dicendo da prima.
Just by a little bit.
Comunque andiamo avanti perché il video dura 45 minuti, quindi cerchiamo di seguire le parti
in the game, they are,
adesso siamo a 9 minuti di registrazione, cerchiamo di seguire le parti più importanti.
The saying goes, everything fears time fears the pyramids, right? So we kind of imagine Egypt as something monolithic, something super stable, but it did have crises in its history, and this is one of the biggest ones, because at the time of the Bronze Age collapse, almost all of the known world was swept away and displaced, basically destroyed. Only Egypt survived, and this is what our players need to do, to save Egypt the way Ramses did.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that we're talking about Egypt right now like something that lasted millennia and then ceased to be, but in fact, Egyptian culture still lives on. I mean, the fact that we're right now here and we're working on a game that's glorifying this particular episode.
Glorificano una parola un po' grossa,
of their entire history is amazing, and I often wonder what would the ancient Egyptians think if they realize that in the future there are these people that have this very particular kind of entertainment that is difficult for us to grasp, but they're doing is to honor us.
We should worship cats more.
Definitely. I think they'd be proud of what the internet has done.
Yes.
Here's a question. Who are the big people bringing about this downfall? You talk about this evolution into collapse in the end of the Bronze Age. What's causing that?
The whole collapse was a very complex process, and of course, shrouded in the mist of history, we can only theorize about what exactly happened. But it was a combination of a lot of factors, like collapse of trading networks, disasters, and these external threats, the so-called Sea Peoples. In the game, they're very much prominent because they serve as a challenge for you to overcome, especially towards the end of the game. Who are the Sea Peoples? We can only imagine.
Voglio solo dire una cosa velocissima, perché non so se è una sponsorizzazione, non lo è, però per riprendere velocemente il video, dato che ovviamente io non posso farlo, andate a vedere sugli ultimi video sul clan Legge Italica, perché hanno rilasciato i primissimi gameplay di un assedio di TotalWar Pharaoh, rilasciato da loro per l'appunto, perché sono in collaborazione con il team Sophia della TotalWar. Quindi andate assolutamente sul loro canale a vedere il gameplay dell'assedio, perché vi rendete conto un attimo di com'è il gioco, e sicuramente molto carino, molto anche sulla scia di Troy, però andate sul loro canale che così vi fate un'idea.
Some of them are coming from the Aegean, some are coming from further west, some of them are raiders and marauders that just arrive here to plunder and destroy. Others actually are displaced and they're looking for a new place to settle. But whether their intentions are actually just to find a new home or not, it matters very little, because they turn out to be a threat to every civilization in the area. And it is believed that they brought destruction to the city-states in Greece, to the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, to the many kingdoms in the Levant, and they threatened Egypt. itself at the end. But as we mentioned, Ramesses managed to push them back.
So we're not talking about mythical Atlanteans coming up. We're talking about a group of people who are coming in and threatening the whole region.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing mythical about them. They're just coming here to take what they believe is theirs, and it might be home, it might be goods and shiny stuff.
So in TotalWar Pharaoh, they're the big baddies who are really pushing things along in the game.
Yeah, you could say that. Pharaoh is interesting because it's both centered on this, moments in time when civilizations were threatened and were not actually ready to withstand the threat. It came by surprise. And Egypt managed, but at the same time, it wasn't easy, right? And you get to think about what you would do in that situation where you need to probably seize power and also repel an external invasion. So this is not only, the usual TotalWar vying for power, but also thinking about how to also, protect the kingdom that you
Come
have
in ogni
afterwards.
Total War.
The experience that we're trying to give to the player in the game is one about gaining power and using that power to survive and overcome the challenges. Like, getting that power is not the ultimate goal. Using that power to protect what is yours
Come in
is
ogni Total
actually-
War.
which is a part of the survival thing.
Awesome. So it's really about building a kingdom in Egypt, and one that would last like we know the Egyptian kingdoms really did.
Yeah, of course. And the sandbox aspect of the game also kicks in here because you're in no way obliged to, say, become the pharaoh in order to survive. You can try to do it without becoming the pharaoh. Of course, it will be a bit harder for you, very likely, but it's still is something that is up to the player to decide.
Thank you, Todor. Thank you, Maya, for joining us to give this awesome overview
Campaign
of TotalWar Pharaoh.
gameplay
We absolutely
up
can't
next.
wait to dive into more of this game.
We are back with Todor and welcome Alex.
faraone con i ditali d'oro mi è piaciuto,
TotalWar Pharaoh. So let's get into it. Tell me about it.
The campaign is going to be easily recognized by anyone who has played the Total War game.
Oh.
You send out your armies, you conquer settlements, you develop your settlements, you send even
Attenzione.
more armies, and further on until you paint the map as much as you want to. What we have introduced in the campaign is the addition of very significant choices that you need to make through your playthrough.
Voglio ricordare una cosa veloce. Se avete visto l'omino, per così dire, l'armata circondata di verde, con il contorno verde nella mappa, è proprio perché comunque si utilizza lo stesso motore grafico di Total War Warhammer 3. Infatti le somiglianze sono molto evidenti. E basta. Nuovo sviluppatore, sentiamo che cosa ha da dire.
And these make up the faction that you are playing.
Amazing. So you've mentioned developing your own playstyle. So what does this mean for a player to becoming Pharaoh?
Well, for example, some of those significant choices that you need to make are, for example, which of the Bronze Age gods do you want to worship? Like, you can't worship every god, but just a limited amount of those. You can also join the court of the Egyptian pharaoh or the
Interessante.
Hittite great king. Which position exactly do you want to take? Do you want to be a high commander and gain access to more units, or perhaps the vizier who has more access to some internal court intrigue and stuff like that?
Interessante.
But perhaps the most significant choice would be whether you want to become the pharaoh or the Hittite great king.
Interesting. So you
Pharaoh.
can either choose one or the other. The whole point of the game is not just to become Pharaoh?
Well, not really. You get to choose either of those because this will help you also survive the collapse of the Bronze Age. Are there any other choices, Alex, that you can make?
There is one more choice.
Alex è il nuovo sviluppatore. Ragazzi, quando io ci giocherò, mi voglio far fare una piramide e una statua alta 100 metri solo con la mia faccia, con la mia sfinge. Per non parlare poi dei fantasy, ma quelle lì è altra storia. Ne parleremo poi.
You can you can choose not to become any of those. You can choose to be a brave person and do it by yourself, not
È russo lui?
regarding
Si
yourself
sente, si
with
sente.
courting tricks, etc.
Ah no, è
All
bulgaro,
this,
scusatemi. Perché il team Sophia è della
noise, if
Bulgaria.
you will. It's going to be hard at all. It's going to be much tougher to do that.
But again, do you want to spend your gold in the court or do you want to spend it on troops?
Let's see.
Troops.
Something interesting here, like all of our systems that we're trying we're creating them with the idea of the sandbox element of the game. So when we're talking about many choices, the player will have the choice to combine all of those systems in a particular way that they would like to do.
So obviously the evolution of your kingdom is a big deal, whether you choose to be a pharaoh or whether you choose to be a Hittite king or choose to go the bold path of nothing. But all of this sort of revolves around this idea of your kingdom evolving from prosperity to crisis to collapse. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's more than your kingdom. It's actually the entire world. This is how we portray the collapse of the Bronze Age. The world goes through several distinct states of collapse, and it all depends on the pillars of civilization. These are special settlements on the campaign map that we consider core for the Bronze Age civilized world. And as these settlements get damaged or even destroyed, the overall level of civilization goes down. And there are, as I said, several different levels. Prosperity, where the world is bright and sunny, and you can see it in the game. But as these pillars of civilization get destroyed or damaged, the world will grow foggier, as if though there is an impending sandstorm on the horizon, and this is the level of crisis. As you enter the level of crisis, not only the visuals will change, both in campaign and in battle. Roving barbarian factions, for example, the sea peoples and those tribes that live in the deserts will also get buffs, which will empower them. And there is a further level of collapse where the world gets darker, like clearer but darker at the same time, and it really conveys the sense of despair. You are not at the brink of apocalypse at this point. You are within the apocalypse, and you need to survive. It takes everything for you to push through this.
You might not.
You might not survive. Most of the civilizations back then did not survive.
They didn't. Yeah.
Egypt did, but
historically, we know what happened during the collapse of the Bronze Age. We have the sea peoples washing over the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. There was probably some apocalyptic event in the realm. So we represent this in the game by disasters of different sorts. They're not visible on the campaign map, but they can affect huge parts of the map. We call them realms. So when you go into collapse, earthquakes, plagues, droughts, they will start to appear much frequently. The player would like not to be in this place.
I don't think anyone would at this point.
So basically,
no way.
As your civilization goes and collapses sort of through war or turmoil, the whole world is representing that by collapsing as well.
Questa cosa curiosa.
We have pillars of civilization, those settlements, we have them across the map. So the player might start in Egypt, but all of a sudden in Canaan, for example, some of those pillars of civilization there are destroyed. What can the player do just to amend the situation? They need to go there and conquer these lands and just raise up these settlements back.
So if other pillars of...
Scusate, avete visto? Questa, quindi, avevamo ragione sul fatto di dire che è una modalità 1v1 dei generali simil Troy, simil Warhammer, che implementano anche qui, quindi l'ennesima feccia, scusatemi la parola, ma è la verità, per uno storico, o era un pezzo di campagna di battaglia automatica? Io spero che sia così, perché sinceramente se mi rimettono l'1v1 dei generali, no ragazzi, cioè sarà anche un titolo storico, però
of civilization are struggling, it will have an impact on the whole world.
On the entire map, yeah.
Questa cosa non mi piace.
Yes, that's why there are pillars of civilization. They are across the world. So during your early stage of the game, the player will see how things probably go south. Things are going bad, and they won't have the tools in their hands to fix that. But once they become Pharaoh, probably, and you saw those awesome power there, they will be much more capable of bringing this back. And once again, depending on the level of difficulty, we are not aiming to provide an easy way out for the players. Only the most dedicated would probably be able to achieve prosperity back.
Yeah. So basically swing the whole world back into the happy times.
You need to conquer it, you need to raise it back to health. It's going to take
nice. So you touched base parts of
Ma come no, in TotalWar.
What is the implementation of the crown? How do you become Pharaoh?
Well, each faction in the game can gain statistical legitimacy. And the more legitimacy you have, the stronger your claim to the crown of the pharaoh or the throne of the Hittite great king is. Sure. And in order to increase your legitimacy, you need to own territory that is part of the Egyptian or the Hittite Empire. And there are additional ways that you can increase your legitimacy. For example, you can build monuments to your name. You can also conquer the land of your neighbors, and if they contain monuments, you will just usurp them so that you can use them yourself, which is something that historically happened in ancient Egypt and not only. So you gain legitimacy, and at some point, when you have reached a sufficiently high level, you can proclaim yourself to be the actual pharaoh. Now, it really much depends if there is a single pharaoh at the moment, in which case it is harder to do so.
Yep.
But in case there is no single pharaoh, which is going to be at some point the state of the game for the Egyptians, because all pharaoh Merneptah will die at some point. These are spoilers. Sorry. I should have given a sign before that.
Questa cosa qui quindi è storica. Buono. Comunque questa è roba che vedo tutta per la prima volta anche io, quindi
it will be much easier for you
proprio in
to proclaim
diretta.
yourself a pharaoh if there is no single sitting pharaoh. And then you enter a period of civil war that you will have to push through, and you will have to be the faction with the most legitimacy at the end, in which case you become the single ruling pharaoh, and you enjoy the full privileges of being a pharaoh.
And before talking about the privileges, there is something I think interesting. We have this David to Goliath type of story, because we start with limited resources and limited land.
Quindi
to become eligible for the crown, you need to have at least one sacred land. So this is like a fairy tale. Like, you have this sacred land, now you can strive to become the pharaoh. There are like many other things that you need to do, many more lands to conquer, many more monuments to
Sì, è molto simile a TotalWar Troy,
You start from one single land. So anybody, a Canaan faction, can go in Egypt, conquer one land, and all of a sudden become eligible to become the pharaoh.
Yeah, it's actually the choice that we mentioned earlier, that you get to choose whether you want to become the pharaoh or the Hittite great king.
Si prospetta un TotalWar molto
It's
difficile,
possible for an Egyptian faction, for example, it would be more straightforward if they go for being a pharaoh, but they can also head north to Anatolia, conquer a bit of Hittite land, and proclaim themselves a pretender for the throne of the Hittite great king, which did not actually happen in history, although at some point there was a Hittite prince who was invited actually to go to Egypt and become the pharaoh, but he was ambushed and killed en route.
So close. but in terms of legitimacy, generally, we can see it in history. If you have enough lands and enough other claims to legitimacy, you can go and try to claim the crown.
Yeah, I remember that in the very beginning we were wondering, is this actually a plausible scenario? But yeah, enough research and confirmed with some experts, it turned out that almost everything that would work in any stage in history is also applicable for ancient Egypt.
And that's why we like history games so much. Like, the stories there are just as fascinating as any fantasy that you can imagine, like real life. Incredible. Fascinating.
So thank you, Todor. Thank you, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. We cannot wait to dive into the campaign mechanics of this.
Attenzione, tra poco ci spoileranno qualcos'altro. Esatto, via. Un po' velocizzato proprio. Non ho velocizzato io, hanno velocizzato loro. Perché c'è la fascia rossa su quella piramide? Bella la Sfinge. Sfinge di Camry. Scusatemi se va un po' a lag, ma è perché non so se è la connessione.
Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Christo, Miljo. Pleasure to have you both to talk battles today.
Attenzione.
Well, for TotalWar Pharaoh, we wanted to make sure that battles feel a lot more historical and realistic. Of course, we, being in the Bronze Age, have some limited access to different unit types. So we have tried to focus even more with our features on the infantry versus infantry combat. For example, the unit stances feature.
Yeah, unit stance is a new feature. that actually replaces the formations we had in old Total Wars. So they're basically orders that you give to units, but instead of a movement or attack order, they're actually ordered to go forward or an order to go backwards while facing forward.
Yeah, we have also introduced a lot of new animations and the way the animations work for infantry versus infantry combat. You are now going to see a lot of more matched combat, matched animations between the different units. You will see units actually defending against attacks, then striking back. We have also introduced a lot more varied battle maps that have a lot more features built into them that will bring more tactical decisions to the player that is in command of their armies. So now they can find those features like cliffs or forests or different terrains or water that can protect them from the side and try to exploit them in the best way that they can. Thus, for example, try to create their own choke point battle or find a good place on the map where they can ambush the enemy while they're coming at them.
Amazing. So like the dynamic like terrain and stuff has been completely changed for TotalWar Pharaoh. So you can really take advantage of your battles against your enemies.
Well, we had weather system in previous Total Wars, but now we're introducing a dynamic change to the weather. So a battle can start in a rain environment and it can gradually become a storm or even a thunderstorm. And that can change the terrain as well. In rain there will be patches of mud appearing on the battlefield.
Hanno messo la stessa meccanica di Gran Turismo 7.
For example, in a sandstorm there will be patches of sand just gradually building up.
And those have effects on the units that are going to be on the battlefield. For an example, heavier units or chariots are going to find it hard to move through mud and that sort of terrain. Sand is going to exhaust units moving through it faster, depending again on how light they are, thus giving the lighter units more advantage when they're fighting on sand. And the weather itself is going to change the way some of the units behave. For example, archers are going to find it much harder to hit their targets when they're trying to shoot in a sandstorm. You can imagine how hard that can be.
So the dynamic weather has, like, again, completely changed the way you look at battles now. So you've got rain, you've got thunderstorms. Is there anything else we can expect from weather?
Yes, there is also fog, which is from previous Total Wars. There is sandstorm.
Tempeste di sabbia, esatto.
And there is sweltering weather, which is a desert being really hot.
So very warm, very, very hot.
Yeah, this will have a huge impact on the exhaustion levels of your units, and you need to be careful when you're fighting in a sweltering weather conditions. The players are not going to be expecting the dynamic weather in every battle that they're fighting.
They will need to adapt to
this is something that they need to adapt to and see how their tactics might change. Because if they have thought that they can take a certain approach towards the enemy, but then a rain.
Piccola dopo riprendo subitissimo perché veramente diventa un video molto lungo, ma purtroppo ce lo dobbiamo vedere tutto per capire gli aggiornamenti. Io ho capito un po' come hanno fatto qua, hanno utilizzato una maniera di codice, lo dico perché ne so qualcosina, non mi voglio vantare, infatti altrimenti avrei detto so già cosa hanno fatto. Io intuisco, suppongo che cosa hanno fatto, però è una maniera di codice praticamente utilizzata quando si codifica un gioco. In questo caso non si codificano con il linguaggio di programmazione le truppe, ma bensì si codifica con il linguaggio di programmazione la grafica del meteo del gioco. C'è una postilla in un linguaggio di programmazione utilizzato molto spesso per i videogiochi, che è una branchia del C, è il C Sharp, che si chiama randomize, cioè random. In questo caso utilizzi una sequela di, come posso dire, di codici, diciamo così per farvela semplice, che permettono di andare letteralmente a randomizzare una situazione, un po' come quando si tira un dado, che può uscire 1, può uscire 6. La stessa cosa è stata fatta su questa tipologia di meteo, così come su qualsiasi altro videogioco per la tipologia di randomizzazione.
rain comes out and makes it so that this whole terrain becomes all muddy, they might think that this approach might not be as good for their chariots, for example, and need to change their battle plans on the fly when those things happen. Choosing where you fight basically will depend on the type of army that you're building and want to have. For example, it's a very natural thing that the Egyptians have much lighter armies that are going to be finding it easier to fight when they're on sand or in sweltering weather because their armor is usually not as heavy and they're kind of used to that type of terrain, whereas the Hittites, being more heavily armored and not so used to this type of terrain, are going to be finding it much harder when they need to fight in the sand.
I Titi sono
On the other hand,
fantastici.
they are heavier with better armor, so in hand-to-hand engagements when the Egyptians are not using the advantage of their terrains around them, the Hittites might have an upper hand in that.
Yeah. And there are even units that have even more advantage when fighting in the desert just because they're suited and they've lived their whole lives in the desert.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there are a ton of factors that weigh into any battle, from the unit you're bringing to the field to the weather. What else is in Total War Pharaoh that makes it different from other titles in the historical Total War catalog?
Well, we have improved on the way sieges work and introduced a number of new things there. Well, fire being one of the big ones. Now, we've had fire before, and we've seen fire in Total War games from a long time ago, but now it is much more dynamic, and it can spread around, and the player can deliberately set certain places of either a settlement or even a forest ablaze, so that they can use this as a tactical advantage if this is the type of tactic that they want to employ. Setting the settlement on fire is going to make it easier for the attacker to try and capture it, but then again it will also make it so that later, if they want to repair it and keep it after capturing it, it will be much more expensive to repair that city, and the local population is probably not going to be as happy to set their city ablaze when we were trying to
Davvero?
Also, but the fire is, as I said, dynamic, so it will spread around. So even if you are trying to employ a tactic in which you're trying to burn the enemy city down, you need to be careful as to how you're doing it, because the way the fire spreads, your units might suffer from that as well.
Questa cosa del fuoco dinamico è molto interessante.
Yeah, exactly, because fire doesn't recognize friend from foe.
No, davvero, veramente.
And another thing about sieges is that we have removed pocket ladders, finally, and we've replaced them with siege ladders. So we will have siege ladders, siege towers, battering rams, and then the new thing that the ancient Egyptians love to do, wall sapping. They
undermined the walls
and
of the settlements so that it can actually crumble down.
Yeah. And create an opening for the attacking army.
I tunnel.
Now, the wall sapping doesn't happen dynamically on the battlefield, but in the campaign, if the player decides to invest a few turns in undermining the walls of the settlement, they can actually bring some of them down and then start the assault, which will make them fight in a
Fermo un attimo, perché spero veramente che abbiano migliorato le tecniche e le meccaniche del crollo delle mura, perché ricordo che su Total War Rome 2 erano spaventose, ed è un complimento dire spaventose, quindi spero veramente che non ci siano né malus né bonus, ma siano semplicemente piatte nel senso ovviamente che non diano né malus né bonus in base a chi li difende o chi li attacca, perché su Total War Rome 2, ma anche su Attila, soprattutto anche su Attila, erano alquanto spaventose, cioè orrende, insomma.
Different battle map which has already some of the walls broken down, and the enemy needs to find different ways.
Però mi sembra che l'abbiano fatto, quindi dai, spero vivamente che l'abbiano fatto.
It sounds like historical accuracy is really important in Total War Pharaoh.
We have tried to make sure that this game is as historically authentic as we possibly can make it. Of course, there are some gameplay elements that still need to be present for it to work, but all the units that we've done, the way the settlements have been done, the way they have been designed, we have been looking at ancient maps,
Buona questa
ancient representations of certain settlements, and armor and equipment and all those things to make sure that they look exactly as they
Dai, ci
looked
sta allora.
back then.
Hanno fatto molto lavoro.
And then
Ci
we
sta.
do try to improve on how chariots work, because you can't have a Bronze Age game without chariots.
Vero,
We have a few different types of chariots, but the main thing is that we increase the number of chariots you have, and chariots are really, really powerful for Pharaoh.
We wanted to make sure that armies look large with a lot of chariots in them. So now instead of just having 12 or 18 chariots in a unit, you are going to have up to 30 chariots in a unit. And they're still going to
carri.
maneuver around the battlefield well. The way you use chariots, if you decide to try and employ them in your tactics, is going to be very important, because they can be amazingly strong when used in the right way,
certo.
and be very expensive and not
fa
effective
te.
at all if used
Te lo
in the
dico.
wrong way.
You can
Cioè,
get
30 carri
a
sono
chariot stuck in mud, for example,
tantissimi.
or in sand if it's a heavy chariot. That's not a good position to be.
No,
It's
davvero.
absolutely amazing. It just the complexity of it. It's no longer just a power play. It is you got to consider all these factors in your battle.
If the player is utilizing the terrain the way they are supposed to, the way they should, and if the player is playing to the strengths of their own army and to the weaknesses of the enemy army, they are going to have a lot more chances to win a battle that actually might look very, very bad for them in the beginning.
Milcho, Hristo, thank you for joining us to talk about battles.
Oh my god, there was so much in
So
there.
good.
So much.
Siege ladders,
Yes.
dynamic weather,
Yes.
fire.
Yes.
Let's take a quick look at
Mi
those beautiful
dicevi.
battle maps and a special look at the city of Mennefer.
Colonna sonora comunque da 10 lode. Colonna sonora da 10 lode.
Welcome back to TotalWar. Welcome, Emma. So we are going to be talking about
Tornati.
the culture and history of TotalWar Pharaoh. So let's get right into it.
Lui secondo me è il
Tell me about the
CEO,
New Kingdom of Egypt.
il primo sulla questo qua che parla.
Is the period in which Egypt grows to a
Cioè
majestic
CEO
empire.
del progetto,
Takes
ovviamente,
place between
non
the
di tutto.
16th and the 11th century BC, and we're looking at a period right at the end, after the Egyptian empire has reached
Ok,
its
quindi questo qui è l'ultimo
topmost
pezzo.
position, and it started to slowly grow into.
Se non
go
vi
into
dispiace,
decline.
mando un pochino più
Egyptian
veloce perché
deities were a huge
se no
part
non
of
finisce
Egyptian
più.
culture. So what part do they play in TotalWar Pharaoh?
Different subsets of deities
Bello.
were revered in different parts of the
Bello,
realms.
bello, bello, bello,
And
bello,
we are
bello.
reflecting this in the game by having different subsets of deities being available in each realm, and whereupon you discover
Set,
this subset,
Horus,
and you are able to worship them,
Ra,
sort of like you've
vari
encountered this
dei
local cult,
egiziani.
and you've decided that this is a god worth worshipping because it suits you, usually.
Sure.
Yeah, and the challenge that we have in the game is that we're not only showing the Egyptian gods, but we're also showing the gods of the Hittites and the Canaanites.
Chiaro, chiaro, chiaro.
And the main problem is that we can't include absolutely every deity. That's impossible, because the Hittites, for example, they had
They supposedly had 1,000.
yeah.
Oh wow.
So they really,
Thousand.
it
Eh?
went into details.
It would be a
Mille?
bit steady, the game. And also, we would need every
Just a little
little
bit.
village and group of people to have their own separate god, which would be kind of difficult to implement, honestly.
Of course.
Now, I know you just mentioned that you've got all these different cultures with all of these different deities, and obviously we're representing a territory all the way from up in Turkey, down through Egypt, all the way down to Sudan. So can you tell me a little bit about the cultures in Total War Pharaoh and sort of the role they play in the game?
The playable cultures are three. You have the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. And there are also cultures that are not playable. For example, to the west of the Nile, there are the Libu tribes that are living as desert nomads, occasionally threatening you, but perhaps occasionally you can strike a truce with them and perhaps even hire some of their units. We have tried to express the cultural diversity of the Bronze Age with every tool that we had at our disposal. For example, different cultures have different units. They also inhabit different climates on the campaign map, so you will be fighting on desert battle maps maps or battle maps around the Nile or in oasis when you're fighting anywhere in Egypt, while the battle maps in Anatolia are more green and lush with imposing mountains in the background. So the architecture of the battle maps itself, the various buildings, are also reflect the different cultures. And we have even gone into further details. For example, as part of your character development, you can assign different titles to your characters, and these are also specific to different cultures, and some of them are specific to different factions.
So how have you captured the different cultures from those different regions in the game specifically?
Well, on the more narrative side, we have tried to express the character of the cultures through actual characters, which would be the more generic kind of commanders and generals that you play with on the campaign map. And since they are very
sì, la grafica ricorda tanto la campagna di Troia, questo qui è uguale.
As characters.
Però vabbè, ci
all
sta.
of them have specific quirks. The Egyptians are a bit haughty, for example. The Nubian Egyptians, sort of long after the lost glory of the Kush kingdom, which was subjugated by Egypt at some point during the New Kingdom. The Canaanites are ready for everything because they've seen everything. Their country has been, their land has been a battleground for great empires for centuries. They're used to everything. They're a bit nihilistic, but still they hold out hope that their children might inherit something livable. And the Hittites are sort of divided between the type of Hittite leader that might want to keep their community together and protect their community, and the other one who is just a mercenary at heart and try to simply find profit where he can.
Who are the faces? Who are the rulers we are going to see in the game? Like, who are the faces we're going to love and who are we going to hate in Pharaoh?
Well, I certainly hope that one can find things to be endeared about, you know, in terms of every character that they play with. And all of them have their quirks, but all of them also have humanity, I hope. And I hope that we have tried to express that in the game scripts and whatnot. Otherwise, the three cultures are represented by, respectively, the Egyptian culture by 4 characters,
Quattro per gli egiziani,
the Canaanites
2 per i Cananei,
and the Hittites are also
e
2.
2 per i Titi.
And all of them have their own reasons and claim to glory and to ruling, while others might fall more on the side of the spectrum.
Voglio ricordare velocemente, andando subito avanti perché sennò si fa troppo tempo, che questo è il primo video, ma per ora l'unico che hanno lasciato di aggiornamento. È vero, è molto lungo, ma spiegano tante cose. Sul sito non c'è ancora nulla, lo voglio ricordare. Ci sono i pre-order e sulla pagina del titolo basta. Non hanno aggiornato assolutamente nulla, quindi sì, questo è quanto.
That just wants to prove that they are strong. These two representatives that we have of, on one side, the desire to unite and to leave something for the ages that will be everlasting. This is our quote-unquote main character, who is Ramses, later to become Ramses III. How he starts out the game is as almost a child. He's very, very young, but he has been given the rulership over Sinai, which is a border region of Egypt that is between Egypt and Canaan. And it's basically his proving grounds. And from there on, he wants to show everyone that he is simply the best person for the job. He is extremely talented. And everything that he's tried so far has worked, including keeping in check the raids of the most fearsome raider in one of our other characters, the most fearsome raider by reputation of that time, Ursu, who is a Canaanite war chief. Historically, we only know the name of that character, so we needed to do some narrative work in order to create a character for him.
Shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, we unshroud some of that mystery, and we give him motivation and whatnot. He hates Ramses' guts. While Ramses doesn't see what the big deal is, this is just some raider. While for Ursu, this isn't a game. He's survived for decades, barely. He has 1,000 wounds to speak of how he managed to survive. And for him, the fact that this child is getting in his way of raiding and ravaging and sacking all of Egypt is a real problem.
Indeed, one of the things that I like about Irsu is that he does not really understand the necessity of ruling a land, except for this is a proper source of riches and things you can consume. This is how he works. This is how he understands the world, which is quite different from Ramesses, who has this duty to perform well, like to defend his homeland, and in this prove his own worth.
Right.
Because Ramesses, if I remember correctly, he's very much wants to take after Ramesses II, his namesake.
Yes.
The great pharaoh before him, the father of Merneptah. And this is what he's going to try and do in the
Un po'
game.
difficile da pronunciare.
So thank you,
per nome.
Total. Thank you, Manuel, for joining us.
Ecco
Oh
qua.
my goodness, the culture and history
Siamo
of
arrivati
the
alla
game.
fine.
We're just blown away by all of this. But before we wrap up, a very special treat for you all. Here is the opening cinematic for TotalWar Pharaoh. Enjoy.
Attenzione. Con uno schiocco di dita.
Thank you all for joining us. We're incredibly excited to share a first look at TotalWar Pharaoh. And we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of what's to come.
There's a ton on the way in the next few months. So remember that pre-orders are open and that by pre-ordering, you'll be ready to play day one when the game releases this October.
That's
Ottobre.
us from Sophia and the New Kingdom of Egypt. Here's one final look at the trailer of TotalWar Pharaoh. Enjoy.
Ma ragazzi, ma di cosa stiamo parlando? Le colonne sonore sono meravigliose. E... bravo. Gran bel lavoro del team Sophia. Gran bel lavoro del team Sophia, mi è piaciuto molto. Adesso vabbè, ci lasciano in background queste trailer sotto. I lavori che hanno fatto loro. Bel lavoro del team Sophia, mi è piaciuto. Staremo a vedere anche se ci sarà una nuova collaborazione tra la Games Workshop e TotalWar per un nuovo fantasy, o se veramente è stata posta la parola fine con TotalWar Warhammer 3. Questo sarà il nuovo titolo storico. Del nuovo titolo storico dopo questo sappiamo già che probabilmente è come molti pensano, quindi ci si avvicina più ai giorni nostri, più magari all'epoca delle scoperte del 1500 o del 1800, perché no? Però intanto godiamoci questo nuovo titolo storico che ci voleva, ragazzi, ci voleva veramente tanto, perché la Total War è nata come titolo storico e continuerà come titolo storico. Quindi rimanendo sulla pagina di presentazione del titolo,
In 334 BC,
giustamente, io vi ringrazio per essere stati qui con me fino a questo punto, fino ai 52 minuti, che è veramente tanto. Però ovviamente ne abbiamo parlato, l'abbiamo sgranocchiato insieme questi nuovi aggiornamenti. Ovviamente ci saranno dei nuovi aggiornamenti nei prossimi giorni. Sicuramente non farò video così lunghi, ma magari ne parlerò molto più in breve, video da 5, 10, 15 minuti al massimo. E detto questo, noi ci vediamo con il prossimo video in cui spiegherò diverse cose importanti, quindi mi raccomando, non mancate, perché andrò a spiegare diverse cose invece della parte fantasy di Warhammer, sia di Total War che anche degli RTS, quindi degli strategici in tempo reale. E continueremo così, aspettando ovviamente nuovi aggiornamenti sia dagli altri giochi che da questo nuovo titolo. Detto questo, perché no, iscrivetevi al canale, mi raccomando, e noi a questo punto ci vediamo ad un prossimo video. Ciao a tutti.